He called me the servant in the house I built with my own 2 hands. My daughter just watched, then told me to apologize. They thought they had broken me. They were about to find out that even old wood can burn. If you're listening to this, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. My name is Thomas, and I need to tell you how my sanctuary became my prison. I worked as a master restorer for the city's Museum of Fine Art, a profession of patience and ghosts. My hands, once steady as a surgeon's, are spotted with the brown liver blooms of age now. They are a map of my history, scarred from slip-ups with sharp chisels and the caustic bite of solvents. But these hands have touched the divine. They have grazed the cracked hems of Rembrandts. They have smoothed the weeping skies of Vermeers. I have spent my life saving things that others would have let rot. I know the chemistry of decay. I know that beneath layers of yellowed grime, oxidized varnish, and the soot of centuries, there is often a masterpiece waiting for the light. I know how to find the truth buried under the dirt. But since my wife Eleanor passed away 4 years ago, the silence in our Victorian home has changed. In the beginning, it was a hollow silence, a vacuum where her humming used to be. But lately, it had mutated. It wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was a waiting one. It was the heavy, suspended breath of a house expecting a disaster it couldn't name. I filled the hours with my work to keep the silence at bay, but I wasn't just restoring anymore. I was creating. For the last 8 months, I had been working on a single canvas, laboring with a fervor I hadn't felt since my 20s. It wasn't a commission. It was a lifeline. My daughter, Emily, was my only child. I loved her with a fierce, aching love that sat in the center of my chest like a heavy stone. But lately that love felt entirely one-sided, a broadcast into the void. She had grown into a woman I barely recognized. The soft, curious girl who used to collect acorns in the backyard had been replaced by someone sharp-edged and brittle. She was anxious, perpetually vibrating with a frequency I couldn't tune into. She was hungry, not for food, but for status, for a place at a table that didn't actually exist. She had married Mark. Mark was a real estate developer, a man whose ambition was only exceeded by his profound arrogance. He was a creature of surfaces. They lived in a sprawling modern glass box in the suburbs, a house with no shadows and no soul. They drove leased luxury cars they terrified of scratching. They talked about equity, leverage, and scaling as if they were religious virtues, substituting financial jargon for actual conversation. But I have an eye for cracks. I see the spiderweb fractures in the varnish before they shatter the image. I saw them in my daughter's life. They heard the strain in Emily's voice when she called to cancel our Sunday dinners, her excuses thin and transparent. I saw the way Mark sweated when he thought no one was looking, a sheen of clammy desperation in his upper lip. I noticed the way he checked his phone every 30 seconds, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. They were drowning in a lifestyle they couldn't afford, treading water in a sea of debt. Yet they refused to reach for a lifeline unless it was made of cold, hard cash. I wanted to give them something better than money. Money burns. Money vanishes. I wanted to give them a mirror. I wanted to give them an anchor. The painting was large, 3 feet by 4. It was a hyper-realistic depiction of the old oak tree in our backyard. The guardian, Eleanor used to call it. The one Emily used to climb as a child, her small legs dangling from the sturdy lower boughs. But I hadn't painted it as a mere photograph. I painted it in the style of the tonalists, Innes, Whistler. It was bathed in a golden twilight glow, the kind of light that exists only in memory or dreams. It was melancholic. It was deeply, softly textured. I ground the pigments myself, refusing the sterile uniformity of store-bought tubes. I used lapis lazuli for the deep, impossible shadows of the canopy. I used real gold leaf in the underpainting, burying it beneath layers of semi-transparent glazes, so that the painting didn't just reflect light, it seemed to generate it. To a casual observer, it was a picture of a tree. To an expert, it was a tour de force of technique, a masterclass in luminosity and atmosphere. It was a painting that breathed. It held the soul of our family history within its bark. I framed it in reclaimed chestnut wood, timber salvaged from a barn that had stood for 100 years. I sanded it by hand until my fingerprints were raw, then polished it to a deep, warm shine that felt like silk. On Christmas Eve, the house was cold. The forecast called for a blizzard. I wrapped the heavy frame in simple brown butcher paper. It felt substantial, significant. I tied it with a red velvet ribbon, the very same ribbon Eleanor used to tie in Emily's hair for her kindergarten portraits. I stood in my studio, the smell of turpentine and linseed oil heavy in the air, and looked at the package one last time before heading out into the snow. It was the best thing I had ever created. It was my heart, ground into pigment and smeared onto canvas. I thought it would save us. I thought it would remind Emily of who she was before the world turned her into a calculator. I was wrong. I was so devastatingly wrong. The drive to their house was a battle against the elements, a physical manifestation of the dread coiling in my stomach. The snow wasn't falling softly. It was being driven horizontally by a biting wind, scratching against the glass like icy sand. The fissnet wipers fought a losing war. Slap, slap, slap. The rhythm was hypnotic and aggressive, a metronome counting down to a moment I feared but couldn't name. My old Volvo groaned as it climbed the winding hills toward the estates, a newly developed enclave where the trees had been raised to make way for monuments of ego. Visibility was poor, perhaps 20 feet, reducing the world to a tunnel of swirling white and the red blur of taillights ahead. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned the color of the snow. I wasn't just transporting a painting, I was transporting a prayer. When I finally turned into their long, heated driveway, the snow melted instantly upon contact with the asphalt, a vulgar display of waste in the middle of winter. The house rose up before me, a stark, geometric beast of concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass. It didn't look like a home where memories were made. It looked like an Apple store or a luxury car showroom. It was ablaze with harsh, cool-toned LED lighting, cutting through the storm with clinical precision. Merck had insisted on a winter white theme for their Christmas party. Through the massive front windows, I could see the silhouette of the gathering. It looked less like a holiday celebration and more like a summit of ghosts. I parked the car between a Porsche Cayenne and a Tesla, both pristine, both leased. I checked the back seat. The painting, wrapped in its brown paper and velvet ribbon, sat there like a humble refugee. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of old leather and gasoline. Bracing myself, I lifted the heavy frame, shielding it with my body against the sleet, and walked to the massive pivot door. The air inside hit me like a wall, overheated and thick with the cloying scent of expensive perfume, lilies, and catered crab cakes. "Thomas, you made it." Mark's voice boomed over the thumping rhythmic bass of a generic lounge track. He materialized from the crowd, holding a crystal tumbler. He was wearing a white tuxedo jacket, with black lapels. On anyone else, it might have been dashing. On Mark, it looked like a costume. He looked ridiculous, a child playing at a tycoon. He didn't offer to take my coat, which was dripping melting slush onto his polished slate floor. He didn't look at me. His eyes were darting over my shoulder, scanning the room, checking the door. "Throw your stuff in the guest room," he said, already turning away, "and grab a drink. We're networking. The mayor's here." Networking on Christmas Eve. The word tasted like ash. "Merry Christmas, Mark," I said, but he was already gone, sliding toward a man in a velvet blazer with a predator's grin. I swallowed the insult, a familiar flavor these days, and walked down the long, minimalist hallway to the guest room. I set the painting down gently on the bed, smoothing the brown paper. "Stay safe," I whispered to it, feeling foolish. I found Emily in the kitchen, a cavernous space, dominated by a marble island the size of a landing strip. She was cornering a terrified caterer, her finger wagging in his face. "It's lukewarm," she hissed, her voice a razor wire. "The biscuit's supposed to be hot. Do you want to ruin me? Do you understand who is in the other room?" She looked stunning, objectively. Her dress was a sheath of white silk that clung to her terrified frame, but her face was gaunt, the contouring makeup unable to hide the hollows beneath her cheekbones. Her eyes were hard, glassy beads of anxiety. She wasn't my daughter in that moment. She was a project manager on the verge of a collapse. "Dad," she said, spotting me. The anger didn't leave her face. It just shifted gears into annoyance. She gave me a stiff A-frame hug, her body rigid, terrified of wrinkling her silk. "You're late." The roads were bad, and it's a blizzard out there. Merry Christmas. Yeah, Merry Christmas, she muttered, pulling away quickly. She scanned my tweed jacket, picking a piece of lint off my lapel, with a frown. Look, don't corner the mayor, okay? And don't start talking about dust or vanish or whatever. Mark is trying to close a zoning deal for the waterfront project. It's critical. I felt a crack run through my chest. I wasn't a father to her. I was a liability, a loose thread that might unravel their carefully woven tapestry of success. I'll be invisible, I said softly. Good, she said, already turning back to the bisque. I sat in a wassail chair in the corner of the living room for 2 hours. I nursed a single glass of seltzer. I watched my daughter and her husband perform, and it was a performance exhausting and desperate. I saw the way Mark's hand shook, a subtle tremor when he handed a business card to a bank manager. I saw the way Emily's smile never reached her eyes, how it snapped off like a light switch the moment someone turned their back. They were dancing on the edge of a cliff, hoping the applause would keep them from falling. Finally, the guests began to filter out. The heavy door thudded shut for the last time. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the exhausted silence of a backstage dressing room after a disastrous play. God, my feet, Emily groaned. She kicked at her heels, and they clattered across the floor. She slumped onto the white leather sectional. Did you see the way the Johnsons looked at the rug? I think they knew it was a replica. I told thee we should have leased the Persian. You did great, babe, Mark said, loosening his bow tie until it hung like a dead snake around his neck. He walked to the bar and poured a scotch. He didn't use a jigger. He filled the glass to the brim and downed half of it in one gulp. The mayor seemed interested. He took the card. He took the card, Mark. He didn't sign the permit. He will, Mark snapped. The mask slipped for a second, revealing a terrified boy. He composed himself and turned to me. So, Thomas, gift time. It was so, Thomas. Gift time, let's make it quick. We're beat. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm. This was it. The bridge back to them. Yes, I standing up, my knees popped. I have something for you. I retrieved the painting from the guest room. It felt heavier now, burdened with my expectations. I brought it into the living room and propped it up on the coffee table. It looked alien here, organic, rustic, and soulful in a room designed to be sterile. I made this, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It took me 8 months. It's the oak tree from home, the one by the swing. Emily sighed, reaching forward to tear the paper. She didn't savor it. She ripped it like she was opening a bill. The paper fell away. The painting was revealed. The halogen track lighting above hit the canvas, and for a second, the magic worked. The gold leaf underpainting caught the light, and the tree seemed to ignite from within. The twilight sky glowed with a deep, mournful violet, and the texture of the bark looked so real you could feel the roughness just by looking at it. It was a portal to a simpler, deeper world. Emily stared at it. She blinked. It's a tree, she said. Her voice was flat. It's the guardian, I said softly, stepping closer. I used the old techniques and hand-ground pigments. Lapis lazuli, real gold. It's meant to remind you of your roots, of where you come from. Mark laughed. It was a sharp, cruel bark of a sound, devoid of humor. Roots? Mark said, swilling his scotch. Thomas, look around you. We're trying to look forward, not backward. He gestured vaguely at the canvas with his glass. This thing it's huge, and it's brown. It doesn't match anything. It's gold and umber, I corrected, a cold stone forming in my stomach. It's tonalist. It's art. It's depressing, Emily said. She rubbed her temples. Her face twisted, not in appreciation, but in profound disappointment. Dad, I told you we needed help. Real help. Mark's liquidity is tied up, she continued, her voice rising in pitch. We have a balloon payment due on the jagged loan in January. $80,000. She looked at me with desperate, wet eyes. I thought, when you said you had a big gift, I thought you were going to sell the house, or dip into Mom's insurance money. I thought you were bringing a check, Mark said bluntly. The air left the room. I brought you a legacy, I said, my voice barely a whisper. This painting, the materials alone, the time, it is worth more than you understand. Does it pay the mortgage? Mark sneered. He walked up to the painting and tapped the frame with his fingernail. Click, click. Can I deposit it at Chase? No. He looked me dead in the eye, his pupils blown wide from alcohol and stress. It's just wall filler, Thomas, and it doesn't even match our aesthetic. It's trash. It's sentimental trash. The word hung in the air, vibrating. Trash. 40 years of mastery. 8 months of labor. My heart. My grief. Trash. You don't mean that, I whispered. I do, Emily snapped. Her stress boiled over into a sudden blinding rage. She stood up, her face blotchy. I'm sick of your little hobbies, Dad. You sit in that dusty old house playing with paint while we are drowning out here. We are fighting for our lives, and you bring us a picture of a dead tree? She pointed to the pivot door. Take it away. Put it in your attic with the rest of your junk. I don't want to look at it. She kicked the frame. It wasn't a hard kick, but the toe of her heel connected with the reclaimed chestnut wood. A small, pale scuff appeared on the dark finish. She kicked my heart. Something inside me broke. It was a distinct sensation, like a strut snapping in a bridge. The load was too heavy. The tension was too high. The structure of my love for them collapsed, and then, instantly, it healed, but it didn't heal back into flesh. It healed into something harder. Cold-rolled steel. I looked at the scuff on the wood. I looked at my daughter's contorted face. I looked at Mark's arrogant, drunken sneer. Very well, I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady, calm. It was the voice of a man who has assessed the damage and determined that the object is beyond repair. I bent down and picked up the painting. It felt lighter now, as if the spirit had retreated deep into the canvas to hide from them. I will take it, I said. Good, Mark said, turning his back to pour another drink, dismissing me as if I were the help. And don't come back until you're ready to talk numbers. Real numbers. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look at Emily, who was now weeping into her hands, not for me, but for the money she didn't get. I walked out into the snow. The wind was still howling, but I couldn't feel the cold anymore. I felt a strange, crystalline clarity. They wanted numbers? They wanted to talk about value solely in terms of currency. I would give them numbers. The week that bridges Christmas and New Year's is for most a liminal space, a time of leftovers, sluggish reflection, and the quiet anticipation of the calendar turning. For me, it was a time of cold, calculated execution. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I moved through my house like a ghost, fueled by a singular, grim purpose. I called Julian on December 26th. Julian was the head curator at the Sterling Auction House, a man with a monocle for a soul. We had known each other for 30 years. We had argued over the provenance of dubious sketches in dusty backrooms, and toasted over the successful restoration of Renaissance altarpieces. He respected me because I was one of the few people who could tell him he was wrong and prove it with a microscope. When I sent him the high-resolution photos of the Guardian, the phone rang in my hand within 3 minutes. Thomas, he breathed. His voice was stripped of its usual affectation. You painted this? Yes, it's extraordinary. The light handling, it looks like George Inness had a fever dream. It has the spectral quality of a late Turner. I could hear the click of his mouse as he zoomed in on the digital files. Why are you showing me this? You never sell your personal work, you hoard it like a dragon. I want it in the New Year's Day auction, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the pride I should have felt. That's in 4 days, Thomas. The catalog is closed. The printers have already gone home. Open it, I commanded. Market it as a mystery lot. Attribute it to the restorer. Use my professional reputation. Tell them it's from the private collection of the man who saved the city's Vermeer. Julian paused. I could hear him breathing, calculating the commission, the drama, the potential. You're 4. Once the hammer falls, it's gone. You can't restore ownership. I'm sure. Put a reserve of 50,000 on it. 50? Thomas? For a debut piece by a living unlisted artist? That's suicide. It's not a debut, I said, looking out the window at the gray sky. It's a verdict. Started at 50. The day of the auction arrived. January 1st. A day of new beginnings. I didn't attend. I couldn't bear the smell of the auction house, the mixture of old money, dry cleaning, and desperation. Instead, I sat in my studio surrounded by my pigments and brushes. The room was cold. I hadn't lit the fire. I opened my laptop and logged into the private live stream. The auctioneer was a man named Sterling, a distant cousin of the founder. He had a voice like crushed velvet. Lot 45, he announced. The image of the Guardian appeared on the screen behind him. Even pixelated, transmitted over miles of fiber optic cable, it held power. The golden light seemed to burn a hole in the monitor. The Guardian, oil on canvas. Artist, the Restorer. A late addition to our catalog, but a magnificent one. The room on the screen was full. Paddles rested on knees. Phone banks were manned by interns whispering into headsets. Bidding starts at $50,000. Silence. My heart stopped. For a terrifying 10 seconds, there was only the sound of shuffling papers. They were right, a voice whispered in my head. It is trash. It's just an old man's vanity project. Then, a paddle raised in the front row. $50,000. Thank you, sir. $55,000 from the phone bank. $60,000 from the gentleman in the front. The numbers began to climb. It wasn't a crawl, it was a sprint. $70,000. $80,000. It turned into a war. I watched transfixed as two unseen titans clashed over the canvas I had poured my grief into. The auctioneer's voice picked up speed, a rhythmic chant of valuation. The bid is with the Tokyo collector at $85,000. Do I hear 90? Yes, $90,000 from the Art Institute representative in Chicago. They saw what Emily couldn't. They saw the technique. They saw the sorrow in the glazes. They saw the soul I had trapped in the amber of the varnish. $95,000. $100,000. Do I hear 110? No. Going once. Going twice. Slam. Sold. For $100,000 to the bidder on the phone. I closed the laptop. The screen went black, reflecting my own face. I looked old, tired. $100,000. It was enough to pay off my mortgage. It was enough to travel the world. I looked at the checkbook on my dusty desk. I didn't need the money. My needs were simple. Tea, canvas, heat. But the money wasn't currency. It was proof, it was an empirical measurement of their blindness. I felt a surge of grim, toxic satisfaction. It wasn't trash. The world had spoken. But as the adrenaline faded, a wave of crushing sadness washed over me. Stronger than the victory. I had the money. I had the vindication. But the painting was gone. My heart was gone. And I had lost my daughter, not to death, but to something far colder. I sat in the dark studio for a long time. Secrets, I knew, do not stay secret. Money has a smell, and vultures can track it from miles away. The news broke on January 3rd. The art world is a small, incestuous ecosystem. Gossip travels faster than light. A popular industry blog titled The Canvas Chronicle ran the story at 6,000 a.m. Mystery artist The Restorer, identified as local expert Thomas Miller, debut piece sells for 6 figures in shocking New Year's upset. They had done their digging. They linked my name to the museum. They linked the style. They praised the haunting luminosity of the work. My phone started ringing at 7,000 a.m. I looked at the caller ID. Emily. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, Emily. I turned the phone over. Then Mark? Then the text started coming. The notifications lit up the screen like strobe lights. Dad, is it true? Dad, call me now. We saw the article. We need to talk. Don't ignore me. I sat in my kitchen, drinking tea that had gone cold. I watched the steam rise from the kettle. I had forgotten to turn off. I knew they were coming. I could feel their approach like a change in barometric pressure. They weren't coming for me. They were coming for the carcass. At 9 hours a.m., the sound of an engine revving too hard shattered the morning quiet. I looked out the window. Mark's black Range Rover skidded into my gravel driveway, kicking up a spray of ice and mud. He parked crookedly, half on the lawn. They didn't knock. They pounded. The heavy oak door shook in its frame. "Dad, open the door!" Emily screamed. Her voice was thin, hysterical. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. They pushed past me, bringing a gust of freezing air into the hallway. Mark looked manic. His hair was unwashed, his eyes red-rimmed. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. He was in sweatpants and coat thrown over a t-shirt. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Where is it?" Mark demanded. He spun around in the hallway, looking wild. "The check. Where is the check?" "Hello to you too," I said, closing the door calmly. "Please, keep your shoes on. I haven't vacuumed." "Cut the crap, Thomas," Mark snarled. He stepped into my personal space, looming over me. I could smell stale alcohol and mints on his breath. "We saw the article. You sold the painting, the one you brought to the house." "The trash?" I asked softly. "Yes, I sold the trash." "It wasn't trash." "It wasn't trash," Emily cried. She was standing by the stairs, wringing her hands. She looked terrified, her eyes darting between me and Mark. "I didn't know, Dad. I didn't know it was worth that much. You didn't tell us." "I told you it was valuable," I said, walking past them into the kitchen. "I told you it was my legacy. You chose to judge it by the frame. You chose to judge it by whether it matched your Italian leather sofa. That was a gift." Mark shouted, following me. "You gave it to Emily on Christmas Eve. It was her property. You took it back and sold it. That's theft, Thomas. That is grand larceny." I turned to face them. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "She rejected the gift," I said. My voice was steel. "She told me to take it away. She told me to put it in the attic. She surrendered possession. She abdicated ownership. It was mine to sell." "We need that money, Thomas," Mark growled. His voice dropped an octave, vibrating with a dangerous intensity. "You don't understand. The balloon payment, the liquidity, if I don't pay a bridge loan by Friday, we'd lose it all. The house, the cars, everything." "Then you should have kept the painting," I said. "You could have sold it yourself. You could have been saved." The irony hit them like a physical blow. Mark flinched. Emily sobbed, a wretched, gasping sound. "Dad, please. We're family. We're drowning." I looked at her. I saw the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. I wanted to say yes. Every instinct in my body screamed to save her, to write the check, to fix the crack in her foundation. But I looked at Mark. I saw the greed in his eyes. It wasn't just desperation, it was entitlement. He was a black hole. If I gave him this, he would be back in 6 months for the deed to my house. "No," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Mark's face turned a deep mottled purple. The veins in his neck bulged. "You selfish old bastard," he whispered. "I'm not leaving without that check," Mark said, stepping forward. He looked at the drawer where I kept my checkbook. "Then I'm calling the police," I said. I reached for the wall phone, the old rotary unit I had kept for decades. Mark moved faster than I expected. He lashed out, his hand striking the phone. It clattered to the floor, the plastic housing cracking. "You're not calling anyone," he hissed. He stood between me and the exit. His hands were balled into fists. The line had been crossed. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This wasn't a disagreement over art. It was a siege. And I was trapped in the fortress I had built. They left that day only because the world intervened. The heavy thud of boots on the porch steps broke the standoff. It was Gary, the mailman, whistling a tune, oblivious to the violence vibrating behind the oak door. When the mail slot clattered open and envelopes spilled onto the floor, the spell of immediate violence broke. Mark blinked, the murderous haze in his eyes clearing just enough to recognize the risk of witnesses. "This isn't over," Mark whispered. "It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. You're stealing my life, Thomas. I'm going to take it back." He grabbed Emily by the arm, hard enough to leave bruises, and dragged her out. I watched through the peephole as the Range Rover tore up my lawn, leaving deep, muddy scars in the winter grass. The silence that returned to the house was not the peaceful silence of before. It was the silence of a trench waiting for the whistle. The next week was a slow-motion nightmare. A war of attrition fought on fronts I hadn't anticipated. On Tuesday, I went to the diner on Main Street, a ritual I had kept for 20 years. The bell above the door chimed, but the usual chorus of greetings was absent. Heads turned, then quickly looked away. I sat at my booth. Betty, a waitress who had poured my coffee since the Reagan administration approached. She didn't bring the pot. She slapped a laminated menu down on the table. "I saw what your daughter posted," she said, her voice loud enough to silence the room. "About how you cheated her out of her inheritance. About how you're sitting on a fortune while she's about to lose her home." Emily had taken to social media. She had spun a narrative of a senile, spiteful miser hoarding wealth from his struggling only child. She had painted me as the villain in her tragedy. "It's not like that, Betty," I said quietly. "Shame on you, Thomas," she spat. "Family is family." I walked out, the eyes of the town burning holes in my back. I was isolated. On Wednesday, a courier delivered a heavy envelope. It was a cease and desist letter from a downtown law firm, printed on thick intimidation-grade bond paper. It claimed I had misappropriated marital assets and defrauded my daughter. I took it to my lawyer, Arthur. He read it, pushed his glasses up his nose, and laughed. "It's garbage, Thomas," he said, tossing it onto his desk. "Legally, it's tissue paper. They have no case. You can't steal what was returned to you. But this," he tapped the paper, "this is desperation. This is a lawyer getting paid, a flat fee to scare an old man. They're flailing. But flailing animals are dangerous." On Thursday night, the psychological warfare shifted to physical intimidation. My phone rang at 2:13 a.m. The shrill sound cut through the dark house like a scream. I picked it up. "Hello?" Heavy breathing. The sound of traffic in the background. Then Mark's voice, slurred and low. "Accidents happen, old man. Electrical fires happen. Old houses, they go up like matchboxes." "Go to bed, Mark," I said, my hand shaking. "I can't sleep," he screamed, the receiver cracking with the distortion. "I can't sleep because of you. Do you know what they're going to do to me?" I hung up. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the dark, clutching a heavy iron chisel, listening to the wind rattle the sash windows. I realized then that Mark wasn't just broke. He was hunted. Friday morning, the escalation reached my doorstep. I opened the front door to retrieve the newspaper and froze. The white siding of my porch, which I had painted by hand the summer Eleanor died, was defaced. Red paint had been splashed violently across the wood. In jagged, dripping letters, the word "thief" was scrawled across the door. It looked like blood. It was a violation, so personal, so visceral, that I felt bile rise in my throat. This was my sanctuary. This was the place where I restored beauty. Now it was marked with ugliness. I didn't scrub it off. I took a photo. Then I called Dave. Dave was a private investigator I'd used occasionally for background checks on dubious art dealers. He was a man who lived in the shadows. "Dig," I told him. "Find out who Mark owes. This isn't just a bank loan." Dave called me back on Saturday afternoon. His voice was grim. "You were right, Thomas. It's not Chase. It's not Wells Fargo. Who is it?" "The Russo brothers. They run a private lending operation out of a warehouse in the shipping district. They are loan sharks, Thomas. Old school. Mark owes them 80 grand. The balloon payment he talked about, that's the vig and the principal." My blood ran cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "And if he doesn't pay, they don't send letters," Dave said. "They break legs. Sometimes worse. Your son-in-law is a dead man walking." I hung up the phone. The gravity of the situation settled on me. My daughter was living in a glass house with a man who had invited wolves to the door. The desperation I had seen in Mark's eyes wasn't just greed. It was the terror of a man looking into his own grave. I knew I had to end this. I couldn't save Mark. He was too far gone, but I had to save Emily. I had to lance the boil before the infection killed the host. I sat at my desk and composed a text to Emily. My fingers hovered over the screen. "Come to the house tonight, 8 p.m. Bring Mark. I have a solution." I hit send. Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Miller, I said when the voice answered. Detective Miller. He was the son of my late wife's best friend. I had watched him grow up. Thomas? Is everything okay? No, I said. I have a situation. I believe an extortion attempt. Potentially an armed robbery is going to occur at my home tonight at 8:00 p.m. Who is the suspect? My son-in-law. There was a pause. Thomas, are you sure? He owes the Russo brothers $80,000. He has threatened to burn my house down. He is coming for a check. I took a deep breath. I need you to be here. But I need you to be invisible. I'll have a team in the alley, Miller said, his voice shifting into professional detachment. Don't lock the back door. I hung up. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of tea. I sat in my armchair in the living room, facing the front door. I didn't turn on the light. I waited in the gloom, listening to the grandfather clock tick away the seconds of my family's destruction. The house was dark, save for the street lamp casting long, distorted shadows through the sheer curtains. The silence was absolute, heavy with the dust of 40 years. At 8:05 p.m., the headlights swept across the living room wall. I heard the car door slam, then another. No footsteps. The snow muffled their approach. Just the click of the latch, and the door swinging open. They were silhouettes against the winter night. Dad? Emily's voice was trembling. Why are the lights off? Come in, I said from the darkness. They stepped inside. Mark kicked the door shut. He didn't take off his coat. He looked like a skeleton draped in expensive wool. His skin was gray, his eyes retreating into his skull. He was vibrating with a chaotic, kinetic energy. Where is it? Mark rasped. His voice was dry, cracking. The check. You said you had a solution. Sit down, I said. I'm not sitting, Mark yelled. The shout echoed in the empty room. I don't have time to sit, Thomas. They gave me until midnight. Midnight? Do you understand? He reached into his waistband. The movement was clumsy, jagged. He pulled out a gun. It was a small, black pistol. Cheap, ugly, terrifying. Emily screamed. It was a primal sound, sharp and sudden. Mark, what are you doing? She backed away from him, her hands flying to her mouth. Shut up! Mark waved the gun, erratically. The barrel swept past her, then settled on me. His hand was shaking so badly the weapon blurred in the gloom. I didn't want to do this. You made me do this. He pointed the gun at my chest. I looked at the dark bore. I wondered if I would see the flash before I died. Write the check, Thomas. Now. 80,000. That's all I need. I didn't move. I looked at my daughter. She was staring at her husband with a look of dawning horror. The veil of status and equity had finally been ripped away. She wasn't looking at a developer. She was looking at a stranger with a gun. You're going to shoot me, Mark? I asked. My voice was calm, almost bored. I was the structural engineer watching the bridge buckle. I have to, Mark cried. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat. They're going to kill me. They said they'd cut me up. Then let them, I said. Dad, Emily wailed. She fell to her knees, clutching at his coat. Dad, please, just give him the money. He's crazy. He'll do it. I can't, I said. Don't lie to me. Mark screamed, stepping closer. I know you have it. You sold the painting. The money is in your account. I don't have it, I said. I leaned forward, looking him in the eye. I donated it. This morning, every cent. It's gone. The words hit him like bullets. Mark froze. The shaking stopped for a split second, replaced by a catatonic stillness. You gave it away. Yes, I lied. To the museum, for the restoration fund. The money is gone, Mark. The rope snapped. Mark let out a howl, a sound of pure animal despair. It was the sound of a man watching his life disintegrate. You ruined me, he shrieked. You ruined everything. He raised the gun, leveling it at my head. His finger tightened on the trigger. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was just reacting to the pain. Now, I shouted. The kitchen door burst open with a crash that shook the floorboards. Police! Drop the weapon! The room was instantly flooded with blinding tactical lights. Detective Miller and 4 SWAT officers poured into the living room. their rifles raised, a wall of black armor and shouting voices. "Drop it! On the ground!" Mark didn't drop it. He was blinded, confused, panicked. He spun around, the gun swinging wildly. He turned the gun toward Emily. "It's your fault," he screamed at her, his mind broken. "You and your father." "Mark, no!" Emily screamed, curling into a ball. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. It wasn't the pop of a firecracker. It was a thunderclap that punched the air from my lungs. But Mark hadn't fired. The glass of the front window shattered inward. A police sniper on the porch had taken the shot. The bullet struck Mark's right shoulder. The gun flew out of his hand, spinning across the floor. A spray of red mist painted the white wall behind him, a grim echo of the vandalism on my door. Mark collapsed, screaming, clutching his shattered shoulder. My arm! Oh God, my arm! Officers swarmed him, boots on backs, cuffs ratcheting tight. The shouting was a chaotic den. "Secure! Suspect in custody. Get the medics. We have a bleeder." I didn't look at Mark. I looked at Emily. She was kneeling in the middle of the chaos, unscathed but destroyed. "Yeah, not." She looked at the blood on the wall. She looked at her husband being dragged away, weeping like a child. She looked at me, sitting calmly in my armchair. And then she broke. She didn't cry. She fell forward onto her hands and began to laugh. It was a jagged, wet sound. It sounded like glass grinding in a disposal. It was trash. She screamed between hysterical giggles. She pounded her fists on the floor. The painting was trash. My life is trash. It's all just trash. She was gone. The reality of the last 10 minutes, the gun, the lies, the financial ruin, had shattered her mind. Paramedics rushed past me. They gently lifted my daughter, who was now rocking back and forth, babbling about oak trees and gold leaf. They injected a sedative into her arm. Her laughter faded into a low moan. Detective Miller walked over to me. He holstered his weapon. He looked shaken. "Thomas," he said, "are you all right?" I looked at the empty spot on the wall where the guardian had briefly hung. "I'm alive," I said. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, ancient. I watched them wheel my daughter out on a stretcher, the red lights of the ambulance pulsing through the broken window. I felt old. I felt the weight of 40 years of restoration. I knew how to fix canvas. I knew how to fix wood. But as I watched the ambulance doors close, I knew that some things are broken beyond repair. The police were gone by 3:00 a.m. They took the noise, the radio chatter, and the violence with them, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the one before. They left yellow tape across my front porch and a sheet of plywood over the shattered window where the sniper had fired. I sat in my armchair until the sun came up. The spot where Mark had bled was already drying, turning from bright crimson to a dull, rusty brown. I stared at it. In my line of work, I know how to remove stains. I know the solvents required to lift blood from wood, but I knew I would never get that spot out. It had soaked into the grain. I didn't sleep for the first 3 days. I spent the time cleaning. I scrubbed the floor. I repainted the door. I tried to restore the house to what it was, but the air had changed. The house wasn't waiting for a disaster anymore. The disaster had happened, and now it was just empty. The lie I told Mark, that I had donated the money, was the only weapon I had left. It was the hammer that shattered him. That was a lie. I hadn't donated the money. The check for $100,000 was sitting in my top drawer, tucked inside a book on Dutch brushwork. I hadn't touched it. I knew, with the terrible foresight of a father who watches his child drowning, that I would need it. Mark didn't go to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The text, the weapon, the witnesses. He took a plea deal for armed extortion and assault. He is currently serving 8 years in a medium security facility upstate. I haven't visited him. I never will. I heard through the grapevine that the Russo brothers found him inside, even there. Mark paid his debt, one way or another. Their glass house in the suburbs was foreclosed upon in February. The bank seized everything, the leased cars, the Italian leather furniture, the white rugs. It was all auctioned off to pay the creditors. Their life was disassembled and sold for parts, confirming what I had known all along. There was no foundation. It was all just a stage set. But Emily didn't go to prison. She went somewhere far quieter. 6 months have passed. The seasons have turned. The winter snow has melted into the muddy optimism of spring, and now the heavy, humid heat of summer has settled over the valley. I drive to see her every Sunday. She lives at Meadowcrest, a private psychiatric care facility 2 towns over. It is a beautiful place in a way. There are manicured gardens and high fences hidden behind hedges. It is quiet, it is safe, and it is expensive. I pay for it with the money from the painting. Every month a check is drawn from the account that holds the proceeds of The Guardian. The painting that she called trash is the only thing keeping a roof over her head. The irony is a bitter pill that I swallow every time I sign the ledger. I walked into the visitor's room last Sunday. The walls are painted a soothing, sterile yellow. The air smells of lavender and industrial sanitizer. Emily was sitting by the window, looking out at the manicured lawn. She was wearing a soft gray cardigan. Buttons misaligned, she looked smaller than I remembered. The sharp edges were gone, the hunger for status. The anxiety, the brittle ambition, it had all been washed away, leaving behind a smooth, blank slate. "Dad?" she said when she saw me. Her voice was breathy, childlike. "I'm here, Em," I said. I sat across from her. I didn't try to hug her. She doesn't like to be touched anymore. She looked at my hands. "You have paint on your thumb." "I do," I said. "I was working this morning." "On what?" "A landscape. A valley, in the shadow." She nodded, but her eyes drifted past me. She wasn't really listening. She lives in a loop now, a fragmented reality where the trauma of that night is a monster she keeps at bay by refusing to acknowledge the present. "Dad," she whispered, leaning forward. Her eyes were wide, conspiratorial. "Yes." "The tree, is it still there?" She asks me this every week. "Yes," I said softly. "Still there? The big one? The one I used to climb?" "The very same." She smiled. It was a genuine smile. The first one I had seen on her face in years. It broke my heart more than her tears ever could. "It was beautiful," she said, her voice drifting. "I saw it, that night, when I opened the paper. It was gold. It was full of light." "Yes," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It was gold. I wish I had kept it," she murmured, turning back to the window. I think I would have liked to have that tree." "I know, Em, I know." The bell rang, signaling the end of visiting hours. I left her there, staring at a pine tree in the garden, imagining it was oak. I drove home in silence. The sun was setting as I pulled into my driveway. The house looked dark, but the silhouette of the old oak tree, the real guardian, loomed large against the twilight sky. The leaves were rustling in the warm breeze. I walked to the backyard and stood at the base of the trunk. I placed my hand on the rough bark. I could feel the life humming inside it, the sap rising and falling, indifferent to the tragedies of men. I had justice. I had safety. I had vindication. The art world still buzzed about the mystery masterpiece that vanished into a private collection, a legend that would outlive me. But standing there, beneath the canopy of the thing I had immortalized, I realized the limitations of my craft. I have spent 40 years believing that anything can be restored. I believed that if you had the right solvents, the right pigments, and enough patience, you could bring dead things back to life. I thought I could scrape away the grime of Mark's influence and find my daughter underneath. I was wrong. Some things cannot be restored. Once the canvas is torn, you can patch it, you can paint over it, but the structural integrity is gone forever. The scar remains. I looked up at the golden light filtering through the leaves, the same light I had captured in paint. I had traded the painting for her safety, but I had lost her soul in the transaction. We cannot restore people. We cannot strip away the damage and make them new. We can only love the fragments that remain. We can only glue the pieces back together and honor the cracks. I went inside and washed my brushes. I have work to do tomorrow. Restoration is a solitary act, but storytelling doesn't have to be. If you felt the weight of this silence, if you understand the value of things that cannot be bought, leave a light on for me by liking this video. Subscribe, and we will walk through these shadows together again. Until then, Tell me in the comments, what are you trying to fix in your own life?